All right, so today for attendance, we have this quote from Benjamin Franklin. So this is actually a quote given during the Constitutional Convention. Constitutional Convention was supposed to start in May. They couldn't start straight away because they didn't have enough states, not enough states had sent delegates to be able to show up. Finally, when they get started, it's kind of early June, and we get this presentation, this absolutely fantastic presentation about what changes should be made to the organizing of the country, made by Virginia. Virginia has this this plan, and not everyone agrees with it, but there's a kind of a sense in the conference that this is going good. You know, we might be out of here in just a few weeks. This is a pretty good starting point. But then, and Virginia, of course, is a big state, and then William Patterson from New Jersey got up and said, wait a minute, we got a plan too. And they gave a plan that was really different. And then North Carolina gave a plan. And then Alexander Hamilton gave his own plan. And we kind of got to the point where, wow, there's now so much to work with. And we've got a lot of serious things that we're arguing about here. The sense was starting to be, maybe we're going to close this convention without doing anything. And they kind of realized that would be a tragedy. Like, to leave this convention without coming together on something would be really bad for the country. And that's when Benjamin Franklin says this. He says, I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see that this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. So he's imploring his fellow delegates to begin each day's deliberations with a prayer, the way they had done in the Continental Congress when they were working on the Declaration of Independence. So again, just a quote here, kind of showing the feeling of the founders towards that idea of divine providence. All right. I don't want to save. I do want to save. Now, what I'm going to do here is, so what we're after, let me kind of give the overview what we're after today. What we're going to try to do today is see the process, a real common process, a very common process, and that is to say we've got some tasks that we know how to do by hand. We don't want to do it 500 times by hand. We want to do it once by hand and record ourselves doing it, and then modify it enough so that we can get VBA to do the long work, to go the 500 times. And so the example that we're going to do is going to be to record pulling in data from an external website. And this is just a really fun example because it's pretty simple to do, and you'll get the feeling that it's powerful straight away, but the tool to do it is not available on the Mac. There's no good reason that it's not available on the Mac, because the underlying code base is there. It's just that they never kind of publish the tool. So I made an add-in that will allow Mac users to kind of get there for this example. So let's go ahead and take a look. So what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of bring the Mac users up to the part of the example that's different for them. And then we'll go back and do the Windows users up to there, and then we'll be able to go forward together. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So what you're going to do is we're going to go to the class blog. Do I have it open still? And we are on recording and editing macros. And I'm just still kind of new to using my Mac, so I'll probably do a little stumbling around here. So first thing is, so Mac users are going to download this add-in. So just follow that link. That should download the add-in. And then we'll go through the process of installing that add-in into Excel. It's a little bit different to install an add-in in the Mac version of Excel than it is in the Windows version. But let's take a look. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a blank workbook. I got that. That's good. And then not on the ribbon, there's kind of a little menu built into the ribbon, but then the menu that's at the very top of the screen, there's one here called Tools. And then down towards the bottom, Excel add-ins. My Mac users, are you along with me, or do I need to give you a minute to get caught up? Yeah, just a second, because I know I went to that blog blog pretty quickly. So what was it? The URL for that is vba-course.blogspot.com. while we're, I'll kind of give it a little background that's kind of relevant to everyone here. So, boy, beginning probably back, I don't even know, 2003 or something. I'm not even sure when they introduced the Webquery Wizard, but it had been around for a long time. And it's just a simple tool that you would point at a website and it would say, you know, I want to look at what's on that website and bring the information into Excel. And it was just really fantastic for a long time. And it worked really, really great on static sites. But as sites became more active to where it's like, instead of just loading the page that you want to display, your browser loads a page that has code on it, and that code then goes out and gets the information that you want to display. The legacy Webquery Wizard, they didn't really kind of keep up with it. And they've replaced it now with a new one. In fact, that one's probably available here in Mac too. I haven't tried for a while. Let's just take a look at data. Like you can get data through Power Query now. Let me sure, but it's definitely, there's definitely kind of a current web query tool. The problem with using the one that's the current web query tool, the one that's available in the Windows version, is that the VBA that it records is quite a bit more complex than the old one. So because we're just kind of getting introduced to working with recording macros, we're going to use the old one because it records really simple code, and that's where we want to be. So Mac users ready to go? Okay, so we've downloaded that add-in. We're going to install the add-in. So here's what we do. I'm going to choose Tools, and I'm going to choose Excel Add-ins down here at the bottom of the Tools list. Right, this is the Tools list. It's way up at the top menu. Excel Add-ins, and then I'm going to browse to find where I downloaded that add-in. So just go there, select it, and once you select it, it should show up here and already be checked. Say Legacy Web Query, and we'll say OK. That add-in will show up on the Data tab. So you come to the Data tab, and the Data tab, where'd you go, Data tab? And way over here at the right, then you've got this thing called Legacy Web Query. So what that's going to do is it's going to build the web query object. So web query object is, you know, something that will get built onto this worksheet that will know how to connect onto a web server, and we can tell it to refresh and so forth. So I am going to select that. And it says here, plug in the URL that you want. And the URL that I have as the default there is one I want you to leave. I built this tool for this example. So I'm just going to say OK. And that is going to, let's see, it's going to bring it in A1. I really want that to be not an A1, but an A2. So let me go ahead and select A1 and just insert a blank row. So insert a row. So I want A1 to be blank and then my web query to start down here. Now this really is a web query, and I think I've got, I did a site, it's a really simple site here just to start with, that's just going to pull some random numbers. And so when I come up here to say refresh all, that should tell Excel to make the request for this web query and update the data. So as I look here on, let's see if I can zoom in a bit here. How do I zoom in? I'll still have to do it. I was zooming down here. We should see that, you can see these numbers here were the ones that were pulled by random. And if I hit refresh all, we should see those change. So that's changing, not because it's telling it to do something random. It's changing because the web, the Excel worksheet is saying, go to that website and bring down whatever's on that website. And that's what's doing the changing here. Now, when we ran that web query, it actually put some code into our immediate window. So let's just go take a look at that code as well. And then I'm going to have you copied in once we get to that part of the example on the PC side. So come to Developer, come to Visual Basic, and make sure I choose View Immediate Window. And that's what's going to let me see this window down here. But later in the example, I'm going to have you copy this code out right here. And then I'll have you paste that in to where and that'll kind of bring you up to speed with where we are in the Windows example. How are we doing, Mac users? Any questions? That work out okay for you? Okay. So I think we're done with the Mac part of that, although I'm not entirely positive. So let me stop participant sharing. And let me share my screen, share screen 2. And now we're going to kind of do that example again from scratch, but we're going to do it over here on the Windows side. Oh, and in fact, let's go ahead and that sheet that you're on, I want you to go ahead and name that sheet query, like change the name of that sheet to query. In fact, let's go ahead and do that here. I'm going to change the name of this sheet to query. And then everyone, let's add another sheet here called tickers. So the idea, what we're the plan for today is to we're going to have an arbitrary set of stock tickers, and let's just say that for whatever reason we need to go and pick up the earnings per share and the price earnings ratio for each one of those stock tickers. And of course, we could do that by hand. I just go to like finance.yahoo.com, type in the ticker, and go copy those out. And you might do it by hand if you had just a handful to do, like 3 or 4, or maybe even a dozen. But if you've got 600 of those to get the information for, you don't want to do it by hand. By the way, what's the real problem with doing that by hand? Yeah. It's going to take a long time. That's not the big problem, because after all, you're an intern, right? That's why they hired you in the first place, was to do the work that no human wants to do, and so they're going to hire an intern to do it. And so it'll be mind-numbing, and it'll take a while, but they're not paying you very much, so they're okay with that. But the real problem is that doing this process, like Alt-Tab, type in a ticker, copy, Alt-Tab, paste, Alt-Tab back, copy, Alt-Tab, paste. That's mind-numbing, right? Where's your mind going to be while you're doing that for 3 or 4 hours today? You might be listening to an audiobook. Your mind is going to be somewhere else, right? It is not going to be on this task. And what that means is you're going to make a mistake. And presumably, we need the data to be right. I mean, I'm just guessing that. And so we get the wrong data put in, we could end up making the wrong decision based on that. And so that's the nice thing about having a macro do this, is that it's going to do it the same every time. And so, in fact, you kind of get the feeling of how VBA feels. And it turns out, how long would you say, just kind of show me on a scale from 0 to 5, how many years you used Excel before you knew there was such a thing as VBA? So 0 would be like, I learned it straight away. And then, if you had 5 or more, you're showing me 5 years. Yeah, so it's like most folks that use Excel have no idea that VBA is even there. And can you imagine, the VBA interpreter is like built into every instance of Excel that has shipped since 1995. And it's just kind of sitting there and, kind of looking over at the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet gets all the attention here. People writing formulas all the time and creating sheets. They never use me. And every time you start up Excel, the VBA interpreter goes, maybe today is the day they're going to use me. And then, hours later, Excel gets closed, and no, it wasn't today, maybe it'll be tomorrow. And so when you first started using VBA, the interpreter was like so happy. It was like, I'll be excited to do anything. I'm like, I don't care how boring it is, I'm going to be thrilled to do it. So we're going to give this interpreter something really, really boring to do. And it's just going to be so excited. It's just going to do it as fast as it can. In fact, so fast that we've got to be careful not to, because we can make it like take over and say, I'm working on this so fast, I'm not going to pay attention to your request to tell me to stop because I finally got something to do. Go ahead. So the question is, how come companies don't do it? And for a long time, companies kind of had the same thing that humans do. I think they didn't even know that it was there. And I think that's still, in kind of one thing that drives it. And then the second thing, then they might know, but we just don't know how to do it. And so lack of expertise gets there. Yeah. So I don't know. Can you imagine? It's the year 2022. Can you imagine that you could go to a company where they actually would have you, like as a human, go and like pull information one piece at a time off of a website? Yeah, that's still pretty common. Sadly, that's really common. Still pretty common. In fact, I had a student come back after his internship. And because I really love it to have you, like if you do something kind of fun and interesting on your internship with VBA, I'd love to have you come by my office and tell me all about it. And I had a student knock on my door and said, hey, Professor Allen, I just got back from my internship. I wanted to tell you what I did because I did some great things with VBA. I said, great, well, tell me, where'd you go? And he said, I went to Amazon. Okay, yeah, so what did you do? And he said, I went right back to the stuff we learned like in the first couple of weeks of class. he told me he did web scraping for Amazon with VBA. And I thought, you're making this up. Of all the companies that have got I don't know if Amazon is the top company in the world about being able to write programs to go and read other websites and pull data off. But if they're not number one, they're close to number one in terms of that competency. Well, they have an intern doing it. Well, it turns out that he was hired to work in the digital camera group. And digital cameras, high-end digital cameras, are kind of a different kind of product because if you're going to work with Nikon and sell their cameras, they say, all right, you're going to sell this camera that costs $2,000 or $3,000. You have to agree not to sell it below a certain price that we set. And so you can sell it for any more than that, but you can't sell it for below, which is not a normal thing that a manufacturer does, but it's pretty common in the high-end digital camera market. So if you can't compete on price and you're offering these cameras for sale online, how are you going to compete? How are you going to make your offer better than your competitor as a retailer? What's that? Well, they got to know their offers, but you can't lower the price. It's not like you can go down because everyone sells them at the price of the manufacturer, the kind of the minimum price the manufacturer lets them go. So you cannot compete on price here. So what are you going to do?
Create a bot that gives them long batteries.
Oh, that's not what he did. No, that's funny. That's terrible. That's immoral. Don't do that. No, he didn't do that. You're thinking creatively, though. That's something there. So no, we're not going to do that. What else? How else might you compete? Yeah. So get yours up there. Okay, that's one thing that you could do. Good. That's not what he did. Other thoughts of how you might compete? You guys are bright. I'm bet you can figure out the way the industry really does this. Rebate. They probably don't want you to do a rebate because that would be kind of just selling it for a lower price. Yeah, you might be able to do something like that. What they do, and it's kind of along these lines, is they say, all right, well, we're going to sell you the camera for this price, but we're going to throw in a flash and we're going to throw in a tripod and we're going to throw in. And so they compete on what the bundle looks like, not on the price. And so the division, went to their IT department at Amazon and they said, all right, we need to be able to get our competitors' bundle information. And they're saying, we're wired to do prices, and stuff, not wired for bundles, but we can do it for you. It's going to cost $100,000 for us to do it for you. And it's going to take a year, but we can do it. And what did they do? What did that division say? Forget it, we'll hire an intern. That's what they said. Yeah, forget it, we'll hire an intern. They hired, my former student, or maybe he got the job while he was still my student. And so he goes there and that's his job. Like, click, copy, paste, click, copy, paste. By the end, he started on Wednesday, and by Friday, he said, I was ready to end it all. I don't know what he meant by that, but that's what he said. And so he said he went home Friday after work, and he said, I remembered doing this stuff in class. I went back and watched the video again, and I worked throughout the weekend to make a system that would do this. He told me I worked, all late into the night, Friday, all day Saturday, I worked Sunday, didn't even go to church. I said, don't tell me, tell your bishop. And by Monday morning, he had a system that would do that for him. Now it's not, when you write code for yourself, it's not the same as commercially ready to go software, because it's going to have an error and you'll be able to look at the code and do it. But he had that thing working by Monday morning. And so he was like, whew, I was just so glad to not have to be doing click, click, copy, paste, click, click, copy, paste. And of course, his supervisor saw what he'd done, and it was like, you did that over the weekend? That was going to take a year and cost $100,000, and you did it over the weekend? So, well, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. And so that was was that his internship? That was almost his internship. What did he do? How did he spend the rest of his internship? Can you guess? Yeah, Candy Crush. That's always the thing. Well, maybe I shouldn't tell anyone that I've done this and just kind of, sit there, kind of move my mouse while I'm listening to my audiobouk or watching Netflix or something. But no, they actually were all, well, if you could do that, maybe you could help us over this. He spent the rest of his internship automating other processes. And so I said, well, did you get an offer, full-time offer? He's all, oh yeah, they offered me a full-time position. I said, are you going to take it? And he's all, no, I don't think so. because he had bigger fish to fry or something, I don't know. So, but yeah, just really kind of interesting. Now, we got to temper that with another experience that I had from someone who wasn't even my student, who came and said to me, hey, Professor Allen, I understand you know how to do this kind of automation stuff. I've been hired to do this internship somewhere here on campus. Like, I forget what it was, but there was something over in the ASB where they had like just thousands of files that they needed to kind of categorize and do something with. And it was going to be like a manual process. It seemed like we could automate this. I said, yeah, let's go ahead and automate it. It sounds like an interesting problem. Anyway, so kind of same thing. You know, next Monday he shows up and, you know, kind of runs the code, and it like in 10 minutes, it does what he was supposed to do for his whole internship, like just completes it. And, you know, he told his supervisor, okay, I'm done. You know, what's next? He said, what do you mean you're done? I mean, well, you know, here's what you needed. Here's all the information. And I am still just flabbergasted at this. And they're all, oh, well, thanks. That's great. That's all we needed you to do. You're fired. They like ended his internship right there. And I was all like, you're kidding me. So he told me this story. So you're kidding me. So yeah, you might want to think about actually just, you know, sitting at your desk and let the thing run behind, you know, think what's the culture of the company you're working at. Okay. So having told a couple of stories, let's go ahead and get down to business. So I'm just going to put a couple of tickers here. So we need a ticker. We're going to get the price earnings ratio. We're going to get the earnings per share. And let's put some tickers in here. Apple, Google, Microsoft, AXP, American Express, XOM, ExxonMobil, Ford, GM. Oh, my favorite ticker of all time, LUV, that's Southwest Airlines. And I guess that's enough. So our idea here is to say we are going to kind of use this set of tickers to go ahead and pull this information in. So that's what we're after here. Okay, so hopefully my Mac users have this ticker sheet now. They already have that query sheet that has the query on it. Now we're going to go ahead and build that query ourselves, kind of using the tool built into the Windows version of Excel. So I'm going to come here and have A2 selected. I have something else in mind for A1. So we're going to start here on A2. And we're going to open the legacy Webquery Wizard. Now, I'm going to show you kind of where the current Webquery Wizard is. And after you have a little more VBA under your feet, we can automate this one as well. But the code it's going to make is really not nearly as clean as the one that we're going to use. But over here, I could choose data from web, and that would take me through a web query process. But instead, I'm going to come up here to search, and I'm going to type in web up here. And I'm going to choose from web legacy. And so this is going to be the legacy one. It'll create the same kind of code that we just did for the folks in Mac. Okay, now it's gonna actually open up a little browser built into Excel. It is not a very good browser. So it's gonna have errors running this script, and that's the real problem. It does not do well with active scripts. So I might have to say no a few times. Like, do you want to keep running scripts? No, but it keeps doing it anyway. No. Okay, good. Now, I'm going to go ahead and paste in a URL from this one right here. So from our course today, September 7th, at vbacourse.blogspot.com, or vba-course.blogspot.com. And I'm just going to bring this one in. What I really want here is I want a web query on a page that's a really simple page. And this is a simple page. It has the nice effect that the data updates as well, which is not required for this example, but it's kind of nice that we can see the web query working straight away. So I'm going to paste that in for the address here and then click on go. And that should then go to that site, allow all cookies, that's fine. And then just allow me to import this data. So once I get it to this page, random.org, I'm going to click import. And it should bring that data right here onto this sheet. Where do you want to put it? A2, great. So at this point, we have the same thing here that our Mac users had in that first kind of introductory example. So if I scroll down to where we see the random part of this and hit refresh all, we'll see those numbers refresh as we're making a new request to that web server and bringing the information in. Okay, so now that we have the web query in place, what we want to do is we want to record ourselves doing the process once. And our process is going to be copy one of our tickers, bring it over here into A1. That's why I wanted it there. And then edit the query so that the URL that it's using is going to be referring to what's showing up in A1. So that when we refresh it, it's going to say, oh, we're refreshing it, but we're not just refreshing the same URL. The URL has been updated to be pulling the information for a different query or for a different ticker. And so we're going to need the other. Well, we'll need this in a minute, but let me kind of show you the idea. So I'm just going to open up that URL. And so this is the page that has the information that we want on it. Hopefully it's here somewhere. Looking for the price earnings ratio. I'm surprised that it's not here. Where is it? Gray box is, it's one of these. Okay, so PE ratio. So this is changed. I mean, I thought I looked at this in my office just today and saw it the way I expected to see it. Is yours like noticeably different? Like it shows the data in like 2 columns? That's what you're seeing? Why am I not seeing that here? Interesting. So we're going to find out what that actually brings in here in just a second. Anyway, the point is, this is the page that we're after. We're not ready to use that URL yet. So we're going to get ourselves going recording the process. So I'm going to think about the process here. So I'm going to start on my tickers symbol. And so if we think about the whole process that we're going to do here, we want to essentially record ourselves doing this process one time. So we're going to have a ticker. We're going to bring in the EPS or the price earnings ratio and the earnings per share. And that's what we want to do one time. And then we'll modify the code to make it happen over and over again. We'll have VBA do that for us. So you always have to think about when I'm recording a macro, the first thing you want to think about is where should the user's active cell be when they run this macro? And wherever that is, that's where you want your active cell to start when you start recording. So where should the user's active cell be when they run the macro that's going to bring in the information for one ticker? Just tell me a cell address that the active cell should be. Yeah, A2 would be great, but the truth is any of the tickers here would be just fine. So as long as we're on a ticker here, it would be great, because what we want to do is say that's how the user is going to tell us which one they want to get, is they'll select it, and then we'll put the information 2 cells to the right. So I might start here on Southwest Airlines or something. Okay, now I also want to think, where do I want the active cell to end up when the user's done running? And wherever that is, that's where I need to make sure I get my active cell to when I stop recording. So I got to think of those 2 things. And we're going to do this in a couple of different steps, but we're going to get the first step going right now. So does everyone have the developer tab showing? Does anyone need help getting their developer tab showing? Okay, so I'm going to come here and I've got a button right over here called record macro. So that record macro button is going to turn on the macro recorder. So I've got my cell or my active cell in the right place. I'm going to say record macro. Now it's going to say, listen, what do you want to call this macro? And I'm going to call this, maybe we'll call it stock info. And I can use any combination of letters, numbers, and the underscore character. So stock info. But it does have to start with a letter. So letters, number, and the underscore is the only thing that's valid. And we've got to start with a letter. Let's see. We have a shortcut key here. So this is called stock info. Maybe I should just call it Control S. Wait a minute. Control S sounds familiar. What does Control S do? Not anymore, it doesn't. Now Control S runs this macro. Okay, so you got to be careful here. It turns out every single key, like combination of control and a key, is pre-mapped in Excel except for M. So if you really want to use like just control by itself, Control M is safe because it doesn't mean anything in Excel. But what I really recommend you do is instead put in like a capital S, and that will change the keyboard shortcut to Control plus Shift plus S. And there are some Control Shift combinations, like Control Shift E, I think toggles editing, or what's it called, like review mode in Word. I don't know if that's something similar in Excel, but I think we're going to be safer here. Now, the next thing that we're going to look for here is where are we going to store this? So our options are 3 options. We can make a brand new workbook to put it in. We can put it in this workbook, or we can put it in the personal macro workbook. I'm going to go ahead and put it in this workbook. But let me tell you what the personal macro workbook is. So the personal macro workbook it basically says, well, what you have to realize is that you can run any macro. It doesn't matter which workbook you have active. You can run any macro that is in any open workbook. So if I've got 3 or 4 workbooks open and I've got one over here that I've got a bunch of macros in, that's great. I can just have my macros stored in that one, and they can work on all these other ones that are maybe not macro enabled workbooks, regular XLSX files. And as long as I have my macro enabled workbooks open that has my macros in it, then I can run those, even on these other workbooks. But what the personal macro workbook is the first time you record a macro and put it into the personal macro workbook, Excel creates a new workbook. It calls it personal.xlsb. It puts it somewhere hidden kind of deep in the file structure. And then every time you open Excel after that, first thing it's going to do is open up that personal.xlsb. So the idea is anytime you record a macro and put it into your personal macro workbook, it's just always available on this machine when you have Excel open, because it's going to be in a workbook that gets opened automatically. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to put it in this workbook. And then finally, we have here the description that we want for this macro. I'm just going to say get the PE ratio and the EPS from Yahoo. Now, I got to be very careful about what I'm doing here, because when I click OK, everything I do is going to be recorded. So I'm going to be very deliberate about what I'm doing at this point. I click OK. We're now recording. My record macro button has turned into a stop recording button. So step 1, I'm not going to select a cell, because if I select a cell, it's going to say, go select B6. I don't want to do that. I just say whatever cell is active, I'm ready to copy that. So I'll press Control C to copy that. Oh, and you know what I'm going to do? I wonder if I can do this still. I'm going to split my screen here so you can see this getting recorded. Okay, so over here, it's writing this block of code, right? We called it stock info, and here it is, writing stock info. And you can see it has these things that start with a single quote are just notes, right? So we can see it had Control Shift S was the shortcut key, and some other notes, including our comment that we gave it. But here's the first line of executable code that it generated for us. And you remember object.property or object.method. This is object.method. We're identifying some object. The selection statement says, well, go get an object. What object is? Whatever is selected. In our case, it's a single cell. And it's running the copy method. It's telling that cell to take its value or its contents and to put it onto the Windows clipboard or the Mac clipboard. That's what that's done. Okay, so now I'm going to click on my query tab, and you're going to see it record the next statement, right? So it's saying, listen, we want to identify an object. Which object it is? Well, we've got a collection of all the sheets. We want the one named query, and we're going to call the method on that one. We're telling that sheet to make itself active, right? Remember, a method is an instruction to an object. It's telling that object to do something that it knows how to do. So a worksheet, the object has built into it the logic, the power to make itself active. And the way we tell it to invoke that is we tell it, hey, select. We tell it, go select yourself, and that then invokes that its own activity. Question is, what's the difference between select and activate? In the early days of VBA, by the way, what was the early days of VBA? 1995, that's right. It happened, I don't know how I was so fortunate, but I actually started using VBA in 1995. I mean, I was like kind of involved and started teaching it at that point. And back in the day, you selected cells, you activated sheets. And so select was for doing cells, and activate was for worksheets. But it was always confusing. Now, what do I activate this or I select it? And so I'm not sure when it happened, but they said, you know what, we're going to make it so if you activate a cell, it does the same as selecting it. And if you select a sheet, it does the same as activating it. So they're like synonyms for each other. So one thing that might be a little bit different, I don't know that you can activate a whole range of cells. I'm just not sure. That'd be something to play with. We could play with. But we can kind of see what's being recorded here. And it's actually kind of nice to, especially when you're getting used to this, you're kind of learning this, to have your macro recorder up, the window up, so you can see what it's recording. So as you do the steps, you can kind of see, okay, now what's it doing as I go step by step. Okay, so I have selected this. Oh, now I really want to go to cell A1. But if I like scroll here, like use the scroll wheel, it's going to record, scroll up, scroll up, scroll up, scroll. I don't want to do that. So how can I get straight to A1 with like one keystroke? You know what it is? Control home. So I'll hit control home. Oh, that was control home on my code window. So let me come back to click somewhere that it's not going to do something. I'm not sure where that is. Okay, so I'm going to hit control home, and that's taking me back up to A1, and you can see it says select A1, and now I'm going to paste. Just press Control V. Actually, I think I can paste by pressing Enter as well here. When I pasted by pressing Enter, I got two statements in here. If you did Control V, don't worry, you'll get this other one here in just a minute. So we can see ActiveSheet.paste. So the paste is the method. But it's kind of interesting to me that it's not a method of the range. It's not a method of the cell. It's a method of the sheet. And I guess that makes sense because there's lots of things you can paste to a sheet. You can paste things to a sheet that like don't go into a cell, right? You can like paste a chart onto a sheet or an image or a shape. Those are not if you go into the cell. So it just happens that pasting is a method of the sheet. And that's why it's so great to have a macro recorder, because I would not have guessed that. I would have been looking around trying to figure it out by looking what the range can do when it's really something that the sheet can do. Now, you know that when you press Control C and you get the little kind of like flashing lights that go around the edge of the active cell, what you have copied, that is your indication that Excel is in some strange and foreign mode called cut copy mode. Things behave differently when you're in cut copy mode. For example, Enter pastes when you're in cut copy mode. Normally, Enter like moves you down a cell or commits the change to that cell and moves you down. So when I hit Enter instead of paste, or instead of Control V, not only did it paste, but it said, okay, we're now we're out of cut copy mode. And so it put this comment in. If you pressed Control V, don't worry that our next activity is going to bring that line into you. It might be in a little bit different sequence, but that's going to be okay. Okay, so now for my Mac users, just going to pause because this next part doesn't apply to you. That code that got printed in the immediate window is what we're about to generate. So you guys just stand by. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click A2 because what I want to do is I want to record myself editing the web query. So I get the code that it takes to edit the web query. So I'm going to right-click A2, and you can see over there that it said select A2, and I'm going to choose Edit Query, and that will bring up my query window again, and it's saying, you could change how this is. Now, you might remember that I told you that everything we're doing is being recorded. That's not entirely true. Well, everything you do is being recorded in heaven. That part is true. But now it's being recorded by VBA, but it's not quite everything, because what this is going to do, and this is common when you open up a dialog box, VBA sees the dialog box, the macro recorder sees the dialog box, and it says, oh, a dialog box. I can tell you need a little personal time here. I'll avert my eyes. And it doesn't pay attention to what you do in the dialog box, but when you click on OK, or in this case, import, it's then going to say, look at how it's configured, and it's going to say, okay, that's the configuration, we're going to record that. So even if we pasted in the right URL here, and then pasted the ticker symbol on the end, it would just record that's the URL that we want now. And so again here, I'm not going to make any change. I'm just going to click on import. And it's going to bring in the code that it takes to modify that web query. Now, at this point, I'm going to stop recording. And because we're going to make some modifications to the code, and then we're going to continue on. So I'm going to stop recording here. My Mac users, go ahead and stop recording as well. Now, Mac users, in your immediate window, you've got a block of code that starts with and then ends here with end with. It's a little bit shorter than the one that's here, but go ahead and just copy that in and bring it in right underneath this range A2 select. And if you didn't get the A2 select, just go ahead and type it in. So this is an interesting structure we haven't talked about here, but it's pretty common to have your code end up being really long, like really wide code. So imagine that you're trying to refer to a particular range. It's not too bad. Refer to a range, you say range A2.select. But you might mean a range on a different sheet, in which case you would have to say, well, I want sheet query dot range A2.select. But that sheet might be in a different workbook. So you have to say, out of all my workbooks, the one that has this name on this sheet on this range select. But the truth is, you could actually have two different instances of Excel open. So to get to the cell you're talking about, you could say, go to this instance of Excel, then go to this workbook, then go to this worksheet, then go to this cell and do what I want you to do. The line starts getting pretty long. And a lot of the length is involved in identifying the object that you want to work with. And so the language has this structure, this with end with block that says, listen, after with, you put whatever code you want to identify a particular object. And then from that with to the end with, that's the object you're working with. And so anything that starts with a dot in that block, that with end with block, is going to be just like taking the object identifier you have here, and you just want to think of that as coming right in here. Like that's the real statement that's happening here. But it's just done so the lines don't get terribly wide. Say, show me how hard that is for you. Are you saying, you know what, that's great, I totally get it, 5. Or that's tough, 2. Okay, so it's not that difficult of a concept, it looks like. Okay, let me go ahead and open this up so we can see it a little bit more. All right, so this between the with and the end with is what got recorded when I edited that query. So here's the important line right here. So this is saying it's saying the object we're interested in is the query table that is behind the selection. And we're going to change the connection property of that, right? We're setting this property equal to this. Now, when the line is really long that gets recorded, the interpreter is going to break down into 2 different lines. So this is what's referred to as a line continuation sequence. It's a space and an underscore. That's your way of saying, hey, this is a long line. I'd like to have it on 2 different rows. I don't want it on 2 different rows. I got a lot of wide screen here. And even if I don't, I'll let it scroll off the edge. That's okay with me. So I'm just going to delete that so this line looks a little simpler. So I'm going to bring that up so we now have that, kind of looking more like a normal line. And you can see that this query, the first part here that says URL semicolon in the connection, that's what tells me it's a web query. I use the same object for connecting on to like a corporate database engine or something. That doesn't say URL in that case. So the connection's different. But in this case, I'm going to want to leave that, but I want to put in my ticker that's the one for finance.yahoo.com. So let me just go ahead and come back here and, oops, I'm going to come back to my blog and just copy the one here for finance.yahoo.com. And I'm going to plug that in. Now, I'm not sure what happened in 2013, but this line right here, this command type .0, that didn't used to come in with this Webquery Wizard. And in 2013, they changed something that made that get recorded, and it's like an error. It doesn't actually work. This is the line that will fail. So I'm going to delete that line. The truth is, we could delete everything down here except for the refresh at the end. And that's what the guys in the Mac version have, just those 2 lines. Because the rest of this, it's just telling it to be the way it's already configured. This says bring in the whole page, don't do the formatting, and some other parameters here. So the only one, and remember, because the Webquery Wizard or the macro recorder just said, I'm going to bring in the information about how it's currently configured. The only thing we want to change is that first one. We can get rid of the rest, but I'm going to still leave it here for simplicity. Kind of make the minimum number of changes to this code as necessary. So at this point, I should be able to go back and run that, and we should see it. I'll select the cell that I'm interested in. I'm going to go ahead and put it onto, and then we'll watch what it does. So let me find my workbook. I'm going to come back to my tickers sheet. Maybe I'll come up here to Google now, and I'll press Control-Shift-S to run that ticker. Now we can see that it's put something in A1. We haven't really seen that it's updated the screen, but now we can see that data has come in. So A1 is here. If I scroll down, hopefully we're going to see information. Yeah, good. Here's the PE ratio and the earnings per share. Is this actually from Google? Is there anything in this text that tells me it's Google? Oh, yeah, it should be Apple. That's right, because even though I pasted Google in there, we haven't told my code to refer to it yet. So I'm not looking for Google, I'm looking for Apple, but there should be something in here that I could see. It's talking about Apple. Oh yeah, here it is, 55. We've got Apple. Okay, so our next step then is to make this actually bring in the right data. We want to do that. So here's what we're going to do. The first part of this macro pastes the ticker we're interested in into A1. So down here, when I see these quotes, and I've got something in quotes, that's what's referred to as a string literal. So string just means collection of characters. We talked about some of the different variable types like integer and byte and long and single and double. One of them was string. So string is collection of characters. And when we have a string literal, we have to put it inside of quotes because like all these other things, those look like strings. That could be a string value, but because there's no quotes on it, the VBA interpreter has to look at that and say, I got to figure out what you mean by that. Selection, and goes, yeah, okay, selection. That's a method. I know what to do with that. Copy, that's a property. Or it's I'm sorry, selection. That gets me to an object. I know what to do with that. Copy, I know what to do with that, and it does it. But when we get down to here, we don't want it to look at URL and think, what does URL do? Is it some object? Is it a method? Is it a property? Is it a statement? Is it a function? Is it a variable? We're saying no. VBA, that's not for you to understand. You just keep these characters in place for me. And so that's why it's called a string literal, and the quotes are what tells the VBA interpreter, don't try to figure it out. Just keep track of it. So what we need to do is we got to say, look, the AAPL on the end, we don't need that. So I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to say, I want to just concatenate something on the end of this. I want to just glue something else on the end of this. If you're going to like concatenate two cells together in a formula, what do? You're making a formula saying, this cell equals, and you just want it to be whatever's in A glued to whatever's in B, and you want to put it there in C. How would you do it? Yeah, the ampersand is the same in VBA. So I'm just going to use the ampersand here. If I use the plus, I'm not sure what it would do with text. I'm just going to try to do addition here. The plus actually would also work here in VBA for what we're doing. So the ampersand or the plus. You might also use the concat function in a range or in a cell, but there's no concat function that way here. So, and then, now let's see. How do I refer to the range I'm interested in? What is the range I want? Yeah, it's A1. So what do I type here to refer to that range? Yeah, range, open parenthesis, open quote, A1, close quote, close parenthesis. Now, as it turns out, I have just referred to an object. That object's got dozens of properties. Name some of the properties that a range has. It has an address. It has a row that it belongs to. You guys are good at this game. What else? It's got a value. It's got a formula. It's got a font. It's got an interior that has a color. It's got all kinds of things. Which one of all those are we interested in? We want the value. So now what we're saying is, hey, copy whatever's the active cell, take us over to that sheet, paste it into A1. We're going to edit this thing that's, so select A2 so that can be active when we get here. And this is going to now say, we're changing the web query and we want it to be this URL plus on the end, whatever is in A1. So now, if I come back to Southwest Airlines and run this, Control-Shift-S, then it's going to bring in the information for Southwest Airlines. There we go. And was it around 55 that showed us the name? There it is, Southwest Airlines. And so these are going to be the numbers from Southwest Airlines. We're feeling pretty good about it. Okay, So at this point, we've kind of modified the code to get it to bring in the right information. Now we got to get the code from this sheet back over to our list of tickers that we're working on. Question in the back. Right, so Mac users should, at this point, should look just like this. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and delete it. You could do it with me as well. So you should look just like this. Is that what you got? Excellent. Another question. So you're getting here to connection isn't defined. Make sure that you've got, you probably have this connection. You've got the dot. Is the dot there? Yeah, because that dot, the leading dot, is what says, hey, this is actually the connection property of the object that's here in the with, right? We really could, in fact, we could do it this way. We could just put that, since it's only 2 lines, it could actually be shorter code by getting rid of the with statement and just kind of putting the identifier of the object in front of those 2 lines. I'm going to undo that, because I'd like to get us to embrace the with statement. But those 2 approaches would be identical in this case. Yeah.
So the URL semicolon is necessary within the parentheses. Are there other prefixes, so to speak?
Other things you might put in here? And the answer is yes. I don't know what they are. But for the web query, it's always going to be URL there. So what we're going to do the connection when we start working with databases towards the end of the term, like pulling in from corporate databases, and the connection will look totally different. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. Now, where was I when I left off, when I stopped recording? My query sheet was active, and I think my active cell was A2. So that's where I left off, kind of getting myself recorded to where we are. So now I'm going to start recording again, and it's going to make another procedure to lift up, to kind of take over from here. Now, but before I start recording, I want to think about what I'm after here. So I need to find what am I doing first? The PE ratio. I got to find this PE. That's the number I'm after. Now, it would be great if this thing always shows up in cell B109, because if it's always in B109, I can just select B109 and copy. But I want everyone to find, where's your price earnings ratio? Is everyone's in B109? Where's yours? 106, a couple away. Anyone else have something different from 109 or 106? Yeah, well, the point is that it's not going to always end up in the same place, because this page over here at finance.yahoo.com is complex enough that there are changes that happen in here that when I pull it in from time to time, the organization of the page changes. That's not true for every page. So sometimes you go, wow, this thing's stable. It's always in the same place. That's great. Just copy the value and move it back. But in this case, we're going to have to do something a little bit more sophisticated to get to that. Any thoughts of what we might do? Ah, okay. So you're thinking like a programmer. You're just saying write a loop that moves us down until we find it. That would work. But think about in Excel, how do you find something? Yep. Okay, so we could use a VLOOKUP, and you're right that we can actually refer to all of those like VLOOKUP functions. We can write those in VBA, so that would work. I'm looking for something a little simpler. Yeah, let's just record ourselves finding it. Record ourselves with Control F to find it. And so I'm going to start off by copying the contents, not the whole cell, but just the contents here, because that's what I'm going to be looking for. So I've got that on my clipboard. I'm going to come back up here to where I left off on A2, and I'm going to continue recording. So, you may think you're ready to kind of move ahead once we start here, but you definitely want to stick with me on this. Don't try to work ahead, even if you think you know what's coming next. So I'm a developer. I'm going to say record macro. It's going to give me a name. I'm going to actually merge these 2 together when I'm done. So I don't care what it's called. I think macro 2 is a great name for it. I'm going to say okay. Now I'm going to do find, Control F. I'm going to paste that in, but I think I'm going to come here and look at the options and just make sure I've got a couple of things done. So I do want to match case, and I do want to match the entire cell contents. the reason is that without those, if it happens to show like PE ratio, TTM, like somewhere else on the page, like maybe there's some kind of story on this page that happens higher than the thing I'm looking for. And if that happens to show up in the text, I don't want to find that one by mistake. So I want to make this as restrictive as possible. So it's got to be the whole cell and it's got to match the case exactly. I'll be finding the one that I'm after. Now I'm ready to say find next. Okay, so it's taking me right to that one. I'm going to stop this. Now, here's the problem. If I click on B109, what's the macro recorder going to record? Select B109. So I got to figure out how to tell it to move one cell to the right. Well, what if I just hit the arrow key to move one cell to the right? What will it record? No, it will record select B109. Yeah, we'll do the same thing. So there's a way I can do it. Like if I hit control right arrow, that would do it, but that's not what we're going to do. I want to use this to introduce something called relative versus absolute references. You're familiar with this idea from working in a range. When you copy your formulas down. There's something similar in VBA when you're recording, and it's this button right here. So right now, it's not selected. It says use relative references. And when I click on that, you'll see that it kind of stays selected now. And so now all of my recording says, instead of recording the absolute cell, it's going to say record what we need to move from the active cell to the next cell. So now, in fact, let's go ahead and bring that up, Alt F11. I'll bring that up here. Oh, shoot. I clicked on the active cell and it said active cell.select. So I'm just going to delete that. All right. So now here's where I am. It's done the find. This find is, it's got all those properties about how to do the finding. And now I'm going to select one cell to the right. And now it's saying from the active cell, I want you to offset 0 rows in 1 column. And that's gotten me to that cell. Now, this next part is a little bit confusing because it says range A1. That range A1 has nothing to do with cell A1. What it's saying is that if this part was the upper left-hand corner of the worksheet, then this would be A1. The truth is we don't even need this part in it. This is used if you want to select, if you're going to offset and select a whole set of cells at once. So I really wish it didn't record that way because this is identical to this. I mean, by taking that out, it's exactly what we had there. It's going to record it that way every time, and we're going to get used to it, even though it's a little bit mind-boggling to say, why is it talking about cell A1 there? And it's just kind of a red herring. So now that will select that cell. What do I want to do? I just want to copy. I'm going to copy that cell, click back on my tickers sheet. We can see it activating that. Now I'm still in relative references. So when I click one to the right, it's going to go just to the right of my selected cell. That's good. You see it doing that same thing there. And I'll do the paste. I'll come back to my query sheet. And I'm interested in the EPS, which is the next one down. If I thought these things were going to move relative to each other, I could do the find again and search for EPS TTM. But I'm pretty sure wherever they are, they're going to be right next to each other. So I'm just going to kind of select the next one down and it will say, yeah, get the next one down. I'll copy that. I'll come back over here to tickers, back over one time, paste, and I'm done, right? And I'm done, right? Yes. Wrong. What's the last thing I've got to do before I stop recording? Yeah, I want to put the cell where I want it to leave off for the user. And where do I want it to leave off? It's not terrible to leave it off here, but there's a much better place to leave it off. So A1, like go back to the top of the list. That's not bad either. A8. So if you're thinking you're working from the bottom and going up, what you're saying is that's getting me ready for the next run. Yes. I think I'm going to more think of the top and move myself down. So I'm going to select A10. So after it runs, it's going to put that information in and it's going to put the active cell right down there so that it's ready to run again. Now I think I'm ready to stop. I'm going to hit stop recording. Very important to hit stop recording. One day I was recording a macro and my wife called me while I was right in the middle of recording it. And there was some problem with the plumbing and call a plumber and there was some issue. And anyway, I completely forgot that I was recording a macro. And I went back to work like for the next 4 hours, just doing stuff in Excel. And then I went, oh my gosh, I'm recording a macro. And I went and looked, and it was just like thousands of lines of VBA. I felt so productive. It was totally worthless code, but it was really beautiful. So, okay. So now I'm going to come back up here to Apple and press Control-Shift-S. And it should go get the Apple data. But remember, right now I have 2 different macros. So I've got to merge these together. Okay, so here's my stock info one that runs and gets the data in the right place. And it ends here. So end sub says end that macro. And then this sub starts the next macro. So guess what? I could just kind of delete the ending of the last one and the beginning of the next one. And it's now one macro. So now let me go back and select Apple again, press Control-Shift-S, and it should go all the way and bring the data in, put it next to Apple. And Control-Shift-S is ready to go and get Google. And if I had just these 8 tickers to do, I think I'm done. I would just Control-Shift-S and do that 8 times and bring it in. But if I have 800, what's the problem? My pinky is going to get tired from pressing Control-Shift-S. So I would like to tell VBA to do this now over and over again. You ready for that? Okay, this part is not recordable. There's no way to record to tell it to do a loop. We've got to go and edit the code ourselves. So here's the exciting part. Let's go ahead and do it. Because I don't really need this to be showing. Okay. So, and we could, so making something happen over and over again in programming lingo, that's called a loop. And there are 3 main different kinds of loops in VBA, and I'm going to introduce you to the simplest one today. And we could write this loop kind of around this existing block of code, but to make it a little bit simpler, we're going to create another macro that's going to be the one that, this is actually pretty useful by itself. Like this macro by itself will just do one. I like that. So I'd like to have another macro that does them all. So I'm not going to record myself though, and you'll notice, it starts with sub and then the name of the macro. And so I'm just going to write that from scratch. Sub, I'm going to call this all stock info. I don't even have to put the parentheses in. If I hit enter just there, the VBA editor is going to say, oh, you probably want the parentheses and an end sub to go with that sub. That's very nice. It's very thoughtful. Okay. Now, for our stock info, the user is going to communicate which one they want the information from by selecting it. This one is going to get all the information. And so do I need the user to communicate to me? Don't need the user to tell me because I know where to start. Where should it start? Well, first thing, we probably want to make sure that we're on our ticker sheet. So I'm going to come down here and find something that selects the ticker sheet. And I'm going to copy that line and bring it up here. So I'm going to select that. And you're right, it should be on A2. So I'm going to copy a line that selects A2 and bring that here. That's going to be A2. So now we're saying with wherever you run this, get me to the right sheet, get me to the right cell. And now I just want to do the stock info. I want to do that over and over again. Well, here's how I do that. Well, here's how I make it to run stock info. All I do is put the name of the macro itself on the line by itself. That tells it to call. So stock info. So now all stock info does the same thing as stock info, except it selects the right sheet and it selects the right cell first, and then it goes and gets the information of whatever is in A2. But what I'd like it to do is I would like it to do that over and over again. And so I'm going to write a loop around this line right here. Here's the simplest loop in VBA. Starts with the keyword do. All do does is it says, this is the beginning of a loop. That's it. So some later in our code, we're going to say, go back to the beginning. And this is the marker that says, here's where to come back to. And here's how you say, go back to the beginning, loop. And since this is kind of a block here, I'm going to kind of tab in what's inside so I can see the do down to the loop and I can see that structure. Probably not so important. There's just one line in the middle, but if it gets lots of lines, it's really nice to be able to see the structure better. So what this says here now is, great, take me to this sheet, take me to this cell, do, okay, beginning of a loop, stock info, what does it do? It comes down here and says, do all of this, bing, 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 bing. It does everything that's there. And when it's done, it comes right back up and says, great, I did that. It gets to this line, loop, and then back to the do. I said, great, and it hits this and it goes, bing, 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 we're ready. It just keeps going. It will do this so intently that if we decide, you know what, we want to stop it, there's no way to stop it. Like the VBA interpreter is like, man, I finally got something to do. I'm just doing it. And if you think you're going to interrupt me to stop working, it's like, no, I'm doing it. So it's always a good idea when you're writing this kind of loop, especially because it's easy to put yourself into this kind of loop, which is called what kind of loop is this called? An endless loop. What's a do loop? Yeah, it's also an endless loop because there's no way out. So I'm gonna do a couple things. First, this is gonna let me break into it. Like I can hit the stop button up here while it's running and it would stop the code. It's called do events. The do events, all one word. What it says is, at this point in the iteration of the loop, just take a breath for a moment and see, am I trying to get your attention? Is there something else that's kind of waiting to happen? And if so, let it happen and then kind of get back to work. So I'm gonna go ahead and run that. Well, I'm not gonna run it because how long is this gonna run? Well, it's not gonna run forever. Forever is a really long time. And it's gonna run until something really weird happens, like there's a power failure or there's a network, the website goes down that we're talking to. My network has something like the nuclear holocaust would stop the loop. Second coming of Christ would probably stop the loop too. I'm not sure. In this case, my stock info is moving down a row each time. So eventually what's going to happen? I'll hit blank rows. Oh, that might cause a problem too. But suppose it doesn't cause a problem. Ultimately, 1.02 million iterations later, what's going to happen? I'm going to run out of rows. I'm going to get to the very bottom. And when this guy here says, go down one more cell, there's going to be no cell to move to. And that would stop it as well. I don't want to wait that long. It would take a long time to get there. So I'm going to do, and I'm going to give it some way to exit. I'm going to do until the active cell's value is equal to something. Like I could put a key value here of like stop. And so if I had stop down here, S-T-O-P, then when it got down here and saw that one, then this condition would be true. Active cell's value is stop and it would know to stop. Well, I'm a little worried about doing that because for all I know, stop is a valid stock ticker. So what should I put in here instead? Maybe I'll put stow or nothing. It's kind of a really weird way to say nothing. But when I have two quotes right next to each other, that's a collection of characters with what characters in it? None. And that's exactly what an empty cell is. It is a zero length string. And so now this is going to keep running until we until we get to a cell that doesn't have it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and run this. I think we got time to run it. So I'm going to come here now. Control-Shift-S just does the one, but I can come up here to my list of macros and run the one that is all stock info, click run, and that should take me to Apple first and then Google. Now, it's not updating the screen while it does this because it turns out that updating the screen is like the expensive operation. Out of all this, waiting for the web server to come back is kind of expensive, but updating the screen is really expensive. Like if you're going to go buy a computer, what's the most expensive computer you could buy? What is it designed to do? Go buy a computer today, like a personal computer. What is it designed to do? The most expensive one? Yeah, it's for doing games. Why? I mean, what's the characteristic of that thing that makes it good for games? Yeah, refresh rate. It's how fast it can refresh the screen, right? So if you can refresh the whole screen 120 times a second, like 120 FPS, that's pretty good. but that's computationally intensive to do. And so Excel is saying, listen, while this thing's running, I'm not going to update the screen because that takes time and effort. We can tell it to update if we want to, but by default, it doesn't. So we don't see it popping back and forth. But when it's done here, it's brought in all this information, and I'm guessing this is somehow just formatted as a date. So let me just go ahead and change the format of this to be general. We've got some EPS numbers that look more reasonable there. Now, if I only have these 8 tickers, I'll probably watch it go, but if I have 800, I am not sitting around to watch it. What am I going to do? Yeah, I'm probably going to get a ham sandwich. I wouldn't get a latte or even a Coke, but I might get a ham sandwich. But I'd really like this thing to let me know when it's done. Could I have VBA send me a text message when it's done? Totally, yeah. I'm going to show you how to do that, but it's not for today. We got to learn a lot more before we get there. But yeah, that's the idea. So what we've done here then is, oh, you know what? I'm going to do one more thing before we call it quits. And that is, I'm going to put here onto this screen a button to invoke this. So one of the things we can do is on my developer tab, I've got this little toolbox, looks like a toolbox with a wrench and a screwdriver next to it. I'm going to click on that. And the very first area up here says form controls. And there's a button, that first one, that's the one I want. I don't want the ActiveX controls, they're a little bit different, a little more powerful, but I'm going to do it the simple one here, the form control. I'll click that, and then I'm going to click and drag to draw a button on this sheet. It says, what macro do you want to run? I'll do one called all stock info. And now I'll change that to say something like get data. Oops. And now when I click off of that, that button will invoke that macro and set it off to run. So really done something that's pretty powerful today to be able to say, listen, I've got information here on this sheet that's going to allow me to kind of pre-format a URL and go pull that information off the web and integrate it into my sheet. We did it mostly by recording stuff, a little bit of editing, and that's like one of the great skills that develop is to be able to record what you can do and then change it to have it happen over and over again, or to behave just a little bit differently. Any questions? Yeah. We'll take a look at your code then right here after class. All right, thanks for coming. I'll get this video posted. Class dismissed. So on the developer tab, you want to come to where it says insert. Drop that down and choose the very first tool there.